And can I just then move on with regards to what comes next and what the international community can do to support Afghanistan, just looking at and learning lessons from 1989, with regards to the defeat of the Russians in Afghanistan, and then the international community moved away, and then you had Afghanistan, the Taliban came in, and then Al Qaeda came in, and then you had the neighbouring countries, mostly Pakistan, having to deal with the situation, the vacuum that was created in Afghanistan. So that lessons are learned from the past, and then there's a clear strategy on helping in the reconstruction, rebuilding of Afghanistan post 2021. What do you think internationally can be done? And do you think there is a clear plan to coincide with a troop withdrawal by the international community to support Afghanistan in the reconstruction and rebuilding of the country?
Well, there's certainly the ambition to continue to help reconstruction. I mean, Britain in itself is I think pledging something like £155 million next year for Afghanistan, and I think most other NATO countries will be certainly willing to put in both financial and in some cases military support, as it were, to the legitimate government. Now, that is one of the levers to ensure that the Taliban do not try to take over Kabul by force, because those monies, that support from the international community, will not be available if an unrecognized Taliban government emerges in Kabul. So that is one of the incentives, if you like, that we can help rebuild the structures, we can help develop the country further, provided that there is a government with whom we can work, and that means a negotiated political settlement internally in Afghanistan. So that, I think, is something that will definitely happen. There will be the counterterrorism task that we've mentioned, a sort of remote counterterrorism task, to ensure that there is no resurgence of terrorist groups operating within Afghanistan. So that clearly will continue. And then I think there will be some specific cases of individuals who are considered to be particularly vulnerable in the new circumstance in Afghanistan, who will need to be protected. And I'm thinking there of some of the Afghan nationals who helped the NATO forces over the years, translators, interpreters, etc. And I think there is a responsibility on the part of those governments to help those people who might be vulnerable precisely because they helped the NATO countries.
Yeah, and can I just clarify 2 points on that? One, with regards to the international aid and development, you just gave a figure of over 100 million, which the UK is looking to support Afghanistan with. But just in the context of Afghanistan, the World Bank has estimated that the international aid component comprises 40% of Afghan's GDP, and the estimated 54% of the population live below the poverty line. And with that in the background, there is going to be a need for real investment by the international community with regards to the rebuilding and reconstruction of Afghanistan. And the stats that we have here, the most of the population is under 15 years, a large number of 15 years of age. So opportunity, hope, success, and prosperity in Afghanistan would be based on a secure Afghanistan, which then allows international investment and trade opportunities in the country. And my question on that is there that joined up plan with international partners around the world when the United Kingdom is also looking at reassessing its international aid commitments around the world?
Yeah, there is. I mean, there have been regular international meetings to put together aid packages for Afghanistan. That has happened at regular intervals over the last 20 years, and that I'm sure will continue. But I think what some of the NATO countries will be looking for is that in addition to putting in support themselves, that some of Afghanistan's neighbours will be prepared to help as well. Now, you could say that Afghanistan is a bit unlucky with its neighbours because it's got Iran, it's got China, it's got Pakistan, it's got Russia not far away from being a neighbour. But I think those countries will also need to play a role in supporting Afghanistan going forward. You know, not all the responsibility can be on Washington and London and Paris and Berlin to support a country that is tens of thousands of miles away. So I think there will be a expectation that some of the neighbouring countries will need to stand up and be counted. Now, that may not necessarily be a blessing for Afghanistan, because of course there are rivalries between India and Pakistan who both want to play a role. There are rivalries between China and the West, and of course the Russian intervention in Afghanistan does not have a happy history either. But nonetheless, it's going to have to be, as you rightly said, a coordinated international effort that goes beyond just the usual Western donors.
And just on that, and you're absolutely right, just looking at the stats available for us openly, Pakistan is Afghanistan's largest trading partner, and China comes in at number 3, and most of their economy is based on agriculture. And then on the, however, they have 1 trillion potential for minerals and mining in Afghanistan, which some would say would be of real interest to its Chinese neighbours with regards to opportunities in Afghanistan. So my question on that is, you're absolutely right with regards to a role by neighbouring countries, and it already has trading relationships, say, with Pakistan, its largest trading partner. It needs to diversify its economy, but linked to that all is a secure, stable, peaceful Afghanistan. Neighbouring countries, you just touched on it, everyone has their own interests. So just touching on some of those neighbouring countries, what would they want to see post-September 2021? Say, for example, Iran has a border with Afghanistan, and there is the Shia population in Afghanistan. And also, of course, we know the majority of Iran is a Shia country. And then you have the situation with China has a border with Afghanistan, which touches on the Xinjiang province with regards to the Uyghurs. And then you've got the situation with India and, of course, then with Pakistan. So what would those countries be looking at to see in Afghanistan post-2020, September 2021?
Well, all those countries have, of course, as you rightly say, rather different interests in Afghanistan. So it's difficult to generalize. Iran certainly will want the Hazara population, which are mainly Shia around Herat in the west of the country, to be protected and to be given a fair share, as it were, of the governance and the wealth of the country. So that their interest will be protecting the Shia population there. China has an interest in the rare earth metals, as you rightly say, and would be happy to invest in mines and some of the industry on the understanding that they will obviously benefit themselves from that. Now, both of those, in order to achieve their particular aims, have an interest in a stable Afghanistan, not necessarily a democratic Afghanistan, but a stable government where there isn't violence, where they can send their people to work and to trade with the neighbour. So there is an overlapping interest, at least there. Pakistan and India is a little bit more complicated because Pakistan certainly sees Afghanistan through an Indian prism, and they would be concerned if India had too great an influence in Kabul. So they want a government that is largely dominated by the Pashtuns, and with whom they feel a closer affinity than they would with the Uzbeks or the Tajiks or the Hazaras. And they would want to ensure or be confident that the government in Kabul was not going to be allowing any sort of Indian anti-Pakistan activities operating out of Afghanistan in their backyard. But Pakistan also has a border dispute with Afghanistan, as your readers may know, going back from, back to the time of the Durand Line. And they will want to ensure that there is no outbreak of violence between the two countries, and that dispute can be managed peacefully, and that the many refugees, because there's still up to 2 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan, are able to go back to Afghanistan. So all the interests of the neighbouring countries are different, but they do overlap to some extent, and provided that there can emerge a stable government in Kabul, I think they will be prepared to put in some investment so that Afghanistan becomes a more stable, prosperous country.
Yeah, and the worst scenario would be where all those regional countries are playing their own interest, which then leads to Afghanistan being a complete chaos.
Absolutely, and there's a risk of that. Indeed, we've seen that in sort of Yemen, where you get the proxy fighting going on because everyone is fighting for their own interests, and Afghanistan just becomes the battlefield, as it were, for regional interests. And I think that is a real risk. I mean, we mustn't pretend it isn't a risk.
Let's clarify just a couple of points. One, you touched on it, with regards to the refugees. And I understand, just looking at the information available, that the Pakistanis have made it clear that a key feature of the transition post-September with the troop withdrawal would need to be a time-bound, well-resourced plan for the return of Afghans to their homeland. And we're talking, I think there's about 3 million, there were 4 million. There's a different figure that goes around as to exactly how many refugees there are in Pakistan. But if that is their firm stance, that the refugees have to be returned back to Afghanistan. Of course, there's some who have integrated into Pakistan, but how do you address that challenge with regards to the return of that large number of Afghans back into Afghanistan from Pakistan?
Well, most of the Afghans who have moved to Pakistan, as you say, at its height of the war, it was probably around 4 million or something, Soviet invasion. I think of those, probably half or up to half, something like 2 million, have integrated sort of fully into the Pakistan life, maybe moved away from the border areas and are unlikely to return. I think of the other 2 million, a fair number have gone back already. So the official refugee numbers, I think, in Pakistan today are around 1.5 million. So these are people who are registered as refugees, and most of those, I think, want to return to their homeland. And if they think they can do so in security, because there's no more fighting in Kandahar and Helmand and other places, then I think they will return of their own free will. Pakistan will be keen for them to do so, because it has been quite a heavy burden on the Pakistan state to have the refugees for such a long time. And they will want to return. So if the fighting gets worse, then unfortunately there's likely to be a more influx of refugees into neighbouring countries, and indeed trying to come through Turkey into Europe. I mean, that is also a risk. But again, if there is a stable government, there is some sort of political settlement, I think a lot of those refugees will want to go back to Afghanistan.
I think you just touched on that point exceptionally well, Sir Mark, is with regards to what happens when there is chaos in Afghanistan, say the post-September, and the individuals in Afghanistan want to disperse across the region. And from the region, say if they go into Iran, then from Iran, they come into parts of Europe. We've seen that with regards to the current Channel border illegal crossing, where many of these young individuals who are coming from Calais to Kent are, Iranian nationals, and therefore the ability to come. I think there was a visa waiver with Serbia, so from Iran to Serbia, Serbia to Europe, Europe to France, France over here. So the issue with if things go wrong post September 2021, then it's not just a challenge for neighbouring countries where some of these refugees may go. It is a real challenge to international community and here back in the UK to us as well. That'd be fair, wouldn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. And certainly conflict drives migration pressures. There's no question about it. But so does poverty. And, many of those who are coming to Europe from Asia, indeed from Africa, are doing so for economic reasons as much as fleeing from conflict reasons. But it will be a combination of the two. And of course, the more unstable Afghanistan is, the more it will drive refugees. And some of those, and we're seeing that already, will be coming into Europe. Yeah,
and just a clarification, just on that, with regards to the refugees, and you've mentioned it earlier with the border with the dispute with the border with Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Pakistanis in the last couple of years have been working to secure that border, with Afghanistan. I think some said they're very close to, making all the arrangements they need to conceal that border between the two countries to stop the illegal movement from one to the other. Will that have a real impact on refugees going back over into Afghanistan, or do you think the border is so porous that individuals will always find their way into that country where they've got the largest border?
I think the reality is it's a very long border. It's over 1,200 kilometre border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And although most of it is now fenced in different ways, it is fairly underpopulated areas. And I think it would be very difficult to prevent people crossing. You've only got to look at the Mexico-US border, which is the most heavily guarded border in the world, and yet people still manage to get across. So I think if there is pressure for refugees, then they will find a way through whatever border.
Yeah. And can I just clarify this specific point just on Pakistan before we move on to just the wider points, is with regards to what happens in Afghanistan, 2021 September troop withdrawal, and having seen what the challenges Pakistan had to face with the certain terrorist organization going over the border from Afghanistan into Pakistan, posing a threat to Pakistan itself. You had the TTP in Pakistan, lost the Pakistani civilian life, and also the military. Would I be right in saying that the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan in September needs to coincide with doing all that can be done to ensure that there's no destabilization in Pakistan as a result of that?
Absolutely. It's a well-known reality that Afghanistan is not a strategic country, if you like, for the United Kingdom or indeed for the United States. Pakistan is, for a whole variety of reasons, but including particularly the population links between the two countries, the historical ties, etc. Not to mention some of the threats that emanate from Pakistan with the nuclear proliferation risk, the conflict risk, the terrorist risk, the drug risk, etc. So, Pakistan is a vitally important country for the United Kingdom, which is why we had the largest embassy in the world there when I was High Commissioner, as you mentioned at the beginning. So it's really important that as we move to the next phase of Afghanistan, we do so in a way that does not in any way destabilize Pakistan. Pakistan's got its own challenges, and we're working very closely, the government, with Pakistan on tackling those. But Pakistan can ill afford greater destabilization emanating out of Afghanistan. That's absolutely right.
And can I just touch on something you just covered earlier, and that's with regards to, you said interpreters, and these are interpreters in Afghanistan who supported the British Armed Forces. We currently have proposed legislation going through the House of Commons with regards to our immigration policy and with regards to individuals, coming into the United Kingdom. I know this was an issue that has been raised before in Parliament and also in public with regards to, the United Kingdom should be allowing individuals who put their own lives at risk in supporting the British Armed Forces on the front line to come to the United Kingdom. And I just go to refer you to a quote on the 15th of April 2021, The Times, Colonel Simon Diggins, who has campaigned for interpreters to be allowed to settle in the UK. He said he is warned that Afghan interpreters face a ghastly betrayal if they are left behind when British forces withdraw this year. Having touched on interpreters earlier, what would you say can be done, needs to be done to ensure that such individuals who put their own lives at risk in supporting our armed forces are able to come to the United Kingdom?
Yeah, no, I think and I hope that the immigration bill will cater for that, because I do think we have a responsibility to those who, through our own actions, we have put at risk or potential risk and are now vulnerable when Western troops leave. And I think each NATO country has a responsibility to look after those people and their immediate families. Of course, there is a risk of abuse once you start setting up a special, not loophole, I wouldn't say, but a special scheme to allow those to have refuge in the UK. But I do think we have a responsibility, and I'm sure that's something that the government is looking at.
And then can I just ask just a couple of questions before we wrap up? One, with regards to one of the biggest challenges around the world is with regards to narcotics, drugs. Afghanistan has one of the largest productions of drugs in the world, and they end up different parts of the world, and back here in Europe and the UK and the United States, around the world. What can be done to ensure that post September 2021, that everything that can be done is being done to address that safety and security challenge to the United Kingdom too?
Well, a lot is already happening with Pakistan in particular to try and tackle the drug threat coming out of Afghanistan. And some of it has been successful, some of it hasn't over the years. The problem in Afghanistan is that the Taliban themselves, who nominally are completely opposed to drugs and drug use, have actually used the cultivation of opium as a way of raising money for their own insurgency. Now, if there is a political settlement, the incentives for that will disappear, and there is some chance then of being able to crack down on the opium trade. But it's important to find some alternative livelihoods for the farmers who are growing the crops, because opium is unfortunately a very it's a rich crop, a richer crop than most others that grow in those sorts of soils. And so it is going to be a continuing challenge that needs to be tackled at every stage along the pipeline, right from the farmers growing the opium crop, right through to the refining, the transition, the shipping, and obviously the demand end in our cities in the West. So it's not an easy task, but again, a more stable government and a less chaotic Afghanistan would certainly make that task easier.
And therefore, I think just to make that clear, it's in our interest to have a secure, prosperous, stable Afghanistan where individuals can thrive and achieve their true potential. If they have a skill, a job, an opportunity, and a hope, they're less likely to be sucked into whether extremist or terrorist activity, which gives them finances, or into illegal drug trafficking or drug production. So it's absolutely vital in that economic reconstruction of Afghanistan and to see it have security, that one can then look towards having Afghanistan being in a position where it's less likely to have individuals being sucked into those two different entities, which we don't want them to be sucked into.
Yes, absolutely. Look, as I mentioned, I don't think Afghanistan's ever going to be a sort of strategic partner for us. It's not going to be somewhere who we're going to get huge amounts of trade going between Afghanistan and the United Kingdom, but it is a place where drugs can come from, where terrorism can come from, refugees can come from, and we therefore have an interest to protect ourselves from those pressures. And the best way to do that, as you rightly say, is a more stable and more prosperous Afghanistan, and we need to play our role in helping bring that about.
Yeah, and just on a question for you with regards to the peace agreement, and also the second reason, some, if you read the papers, say we went into Afghanistan for human rights and women's empowerment. There was a clear strategic decision, which was about security, but there's assumption by some that it was about, human rights in Afghanistan as well. And I know you've answered it very clearly. It's about security in the first place, but human rights is a top priority for the United Kingdom and other international partners around the world. So as we move forward with regards to the United Kingdom's commitment to getting more girls into education and working with international partners to that effect, the peace agreement that is being worked on between the Taliban and the Afghan government, a key component of that, from what I read, would be to look at human rights in that. Would I be right in saying that?
Well, I think that is absolutely fair. I mean, I think the British government is very committed on human rights and on girls' education, but equally we have to be very realistic. We didn't, as you rightly say, we did not go into Afghanistan for the cause of human rights. If we had a military intervention in every country where we were concerned about human rights, we'd be all over the world. So that was never part of the original plan. And we have to be realistic about the extent of our influence over human rights developments in Afghanistan. We can do what we can, and with allies, with neighbours, but it's not something over which we are going to have a huge influence, even though the government is clearly committed to promoting human rights generally around the world.
And this is the statement from Zami Khalilzad giving evidence before the United States Congress. He said, yes, we should be persistent in advocating and supporting women's rights, but we shouldn't be of the view that we don't want the peace agreement because of women's rights. No, a peace agreement will advance women's rights, protect their rights, their right to live, their right to send their children to school. So therefore, the international partners are making it clear that with regards to future peace agreement with the key stakeholders, that they should have real regard to human rights and human rights and reconciliation in that.
Well, we can certainly make that point, but we would be misleading our publics, and I would be misleading your watchers and listeners, Ray, if I suggested that we had much influence over the full content of these peace agreements. So we can certainly encourage and put pressure on the two parties to do that, but at the end of the day, we don't have the ability to impose that.
And that comes back to the point with regards to the comments made by the president of Afghanistan in his recent foreign policy article. He said the withdrawal of the US troops is a turning point for Afghanistan and its neighbours. And that turning point is one where it can create a progressive, peaceful, cohesive, stable Afghanistan with full rights of all its citizens. And that is a decision ultimately for the key stakeholders and the people of Afghanistan. Would I be right in that?
Absolutely, and I think that's a good point at which to end, Ray. I think that's absolutely correct.
And with that, Sir Mark, can I just say thank you so very much for speaking to me today on this very important issue, because I know this issue is something which international key stakeholders around the world are looking at. How do we ensure that post-September 2021, the international community leaves Afghanistan in a stable, peaceful way, which ensures that all those that have given their lives, over the last 20 years to secure that stability, security, are not lost without being able to achieve that positive future for Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.